everything you should know about Angular Ivy. How many of you heard about Angular Ivy? Who didn't heard about Angular Ivy? Just a few, and Michael. So I'm glad that you heard about it. So today is not going to be just what is Angular Ivy. I know that most of you probably know a lot about it. So I'm going to talk what's coming up next after Ivy is going to be released, hopefully in version 9. We're going to talk about everything today. About myself, I'm Eliran. I'm founder and CEO of eSquare. This is a consulting company in Israel, in Europe. We're doing only Angular. And as you can see, I'm doing a lot of Angular activities. I'm one of the organizers of Angular App annual conference in Tel Aviv. I'm organizing my own meetup, Angular IL. By the way, I have a lot of stickers, Angular IL stickers with me. If you want some, just catch me after the talk. And I'm also a writer in Angular in depth. Lately, I'm mostly writing about Angular Ivy. This is a photo from my weekend. Together with Michael, I had a great time in Vienna. We celebrated Michael's wedding. And I have to admit, you have a beautiful city, but the schnitzel in Israel is much better. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry to tell you that. Oh, Michael took me to the wrong places. So if you want to take me out tonight, just catch me later. So after a long wait, Ivy is now available from version 8 as an opt-in version. It's not 100% yet ready, but for most use cases, we can start play with it. This is a great opportunity for all of us, the early adopters, to try to understand what's happening there. But the important part is Angular Ivy should be backward compatible. And I don't know how many of you check the changelog of the Angular core team. A few weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, they released version 9.0.0 next 3 or something like that, saying that Angular now compiles with Ivy by default, which really an exciting news. We're waiting something like 2 years for that to happen, and this is really about to happen. If you don't know, Ivy is actually the third renderer shipped by the core team. We had the template compiler from version 2. In version 4, we had the Vue engine until now. And now Ivy is about to arrive. Again, what's really interesting about all those changes in renderer and compilers, that we, as end users, we're not going to feel it. Because it's like you're changing the engine of the car while the car is driving, which is crazy, but this is what the core teams does. And the question is, why Ivy? So I will briefly going to talk why we need Ivy, and then we're going to talk about what's coming up next. Mainly because of this. And why this? The world, it sounds crazy, but it's becoming more and more depends on those devices we're all holding. And this is some stats makes my mind crazy when I first show them. That 63% of all US online traffic comes from smartphones and tablets. By the end of this year, 80% of internet usage is expected to be from mobile devices. Nobody surprised, huh? Yeah. So the thing is, what we can do in order to make our application much faster and compatible for those devices, we can and should use CDNs to serve our files much faster, separate our files to lazy loading, to chunks, and also use PWA to cache most of the assets for returning users. But the biggest opportunity we have as developers is reducing the bundle. And this is really important part of what Angular Ivy is about to bring us. I took my website. This is just a regular website, a single pager, okay, written in Angular. And it's, as you can see, it fully supports it uses the PWA, the Angular PWA package, and it's supports offline. Okay, it is also using the browser animation module and another few things from Angular material or something. Any guess what's the bundle size of this application? Only one pager showing my talks from how much? 200 kilobytes. 500. Actually 500. Actually 500 kilobytes before Ivy, which sounds really big for that kind of applications, right? And this was a known issue with Angular application. When you just want them for a single page app, the bundle was really big. Now let's opt in Ivy. So how we can opt in Ivy? We can just go to a file tsconfig app.json in our application and add this section, Angular compiler options enable Ivy to true. And after that, just after that, build your application again, and it shrunk in 77 kilobytes, which is 50%. It's really impressive, yet it's not what we looked for, but this is just the beginning, and the core team still working on it. I think Igor Minar showed in Angular Connect that for huge application, it's cutting something like 40%, which is amazing. And for medium-size app, they're still working on it. But the question is how does it work behind the scenes, right? Llama. Llama, that's why in Hebrew. Michael also teach me some sentence in German, no? This is not the right place? Well, so let's take a look. I hope that you can see this 4 lines of code. We actually have just a div, okay, wrapping 2 lines of code. A first one is a span with a binding to title and an ngIf for an app child component, okay? Now, everything I know about Ivy, I learned from this command, okay? So I ran a lot of this command a lot of times, the ngc command. I don't know how many of you had the chance to run the Angular compiler without serving your application or building it, but this is actually the way to run the ngc compiler, okay? Now, after building it with the ngc compiler, I saw 2 things. The first one, we don't have factories anymore, don't have factories files anymore. What's happened, those factories became those decorators now became a static functions on the component instance, okay? Or the class instance to be exact, because we're not only talking about components. The second one, if you see this code, this is was the view engine code. Now in Ivy, it's much more smaller. We don't have this all nulls arrays. Okay, we just have what we actually uses, the tags we uses. And it's doing much more better tree shaking. And it's funny because every time I'm talking about Ivy and about tree shaking with Ivy, people telling me, I don't really need tree shaking because I'm not writing code I'm not using. And this is a really key factor to understand, because most of the time tree shaking is not only for your code, it's for third libraries code. Most of you using RxJS, right? If you use the switch map operator, you don't want to pay for something like 100 plus other operators that coming with the library, right? So this is a really key factor to understand how the tree shaking is making our code much leaner, okay? So with that, we actually achieved the bundle size reduced. And let's go to the second part that Ivy is giving us. If we look at the code again in the view engine, a second. If I'm going to mark this line of code, you will see the view container ref and the template ref. And you're probably wondering where that came from, right? Any guesses? View template ref, view container ref, and the template ref? From the ngIf. Actually, the implementation of the ngIf in the constructor, we have those two. right? This is a structural directive that uses those two dependencies. And in Ivy, it's look much cleaner. We don't have those things, and we actually getting to every component now have a much cleaner public API for components and directives. All right, we only have the ngIf with the CTX. CTX is actually the component instance. Show. Okay. So with that, we achieve two things. The first one is faster compilation, because we don't have to recompile every time we're changing something in the ngIf. We just have to recompile the ngIf and not the whole application, no dependencies between files. And the other one, it's a really easier way to ship files to NPM. Now, another one. We have a much better debugging API with Ivy, template debugging to be exact. And if we take this example of component, we have an app component which have only title and show properties, but then in the template I'm adding an input with bind to a search function. But my component not really implementing this search function. So I'm probably going to get an error, but if you checked before Ivy, the error wasn't really informative. We got only object eval as an handler event, and in a huge application that doesn't really mean nothing to you as developers and as users. In Ivy, as you can see, you're actually getting where it's happening. You're getting the app component template, input 0, listener. So it's much readable. Yeah, readable. Well, so now all the selling points for Ivy, not all, but most of the selling point for Ivy is clear to us. Let's talk about what's coming up next. And what I will try to do in the next 20 minutes or something like that, don't worry, we will not stay here for long, is to change a little bit how you're thinking about the implementation of Angular components in the post-Ivy release days. It's probably not going to be available in Angular 9, but hopefully those API that I'm going to talk about today are going to be available maybe in Angular X or even in between. So where are we starting? Let's take the simple idea of having just one component, okay? In our case, a counter component. We have, you can see, yeah? We have a counter component. We have an input of the counter to initialize the counter amount, okay, or the counter value. And we also have a reset button, which just resetting the counter. Simple one. And this is actually what Angular is all about. We're taking components so we can use them as a custom HTML selectors, right? We create this component, so we have the app counter that we can use in each and every application. But in order to use this one, we will have to do the following steps. Create an NgModule, declare our counter component in it, also declare it in the export array declarations. Then we have to bootstrap this module and import this counter module inside our app module, the application who wants to use the counter, right? And only then we can use the custom selector. I've been looking in the Angular docs and I found out this. A component must belong to an NgModule. And NgModules for me are much more than just a one component. Modules have injectors, providers, DI, zones, just more than just one single component. Modules for me representing applications, not only for me, also for Rob Wormel, for the core team. And I've only wanted to render one single component. What's shiny, before that, my point is applications are not components. And sometimes you just want to render one single component without being tied to any application. What's shiny about Ivy, it gives us the ability to render a component in a manner of single function. render component. And you see the theta in the beginning. We will get to those thetas in a second, but there is a price. NgModules defines injectors, zones, directives, pipes, providers, and a lot of other things. We're not going to declare our components inside the module. We will have to handle those things by ourselves. You want to see it in action? Let's drop the slides and go to a live coding session. So we will have 5 examples of how I see the future of Angular in the days after Ivy is going to be released. And we're going to start with the standalone component concept. And if we're talking about standalone component, you see those functions, the theta render component function, theta detect changes, and theta directive inject. Those functions are still private. That's the reason they decorate or prefixed with this theta sign. Most of you don't have on your keyboard this theta sign. The core team probably don't want you to use them yet, but it always translated in my mind, hey, Eliran, new APIs, take them in your clients and put them in production tomorrow morning. Everything is going to be okay. Most of the time it's not really working, so don't use it at home, but it can give us a sense of where we're going next. So I'm starting with the first one. Okay. Wait a second. Yeah. So we have this counter component working, okay? As you can see, I'm adding plus and reset and everything work, okay? Now, instead of just using the selector, the component selector, let's go to our TypeScript class. And on init, I will use the theta render component with the counter component function.
Can you please switch to light theme in the editor so people perhaps can see?
How I'm doing it quickly?
Command K and then release them and press T. Better.
Nothing happened. Thank you, Juan. And dim? Theme.
Oh, you removed the biggest one.
Wow.
Yeah, theme.
Where is it?
H
Theme. Theme. Theme.
Developer generated.
Oh.
No, you have to.
Maybe not the dark theme. Let's see. No. Juan to the rescue.
And then perhaps this one.
Wow, now I'm like. So I use the theta render component function. Okay. By the way, render component function is just a function I'm importing from Angular core. Okay. And right now, let's see if it's rendering our component. Not really. What's happened? It's looking for the host. It's looking for the app component selector, app counter selector. What's also nice about Ivy, it's giving us the ability to declare any other selector we want. So let's use just my host, for example, okay? And then I can here host my host. And now we have it. Everything works. Wow, we have a component. Works? Not really, I'm clicking. Nothing's happened. Let's see why. Let's go to our counter component and have a console log here that will show us the state of the counter, also here and after resetting. Okay? Console is open. As we can see, the console is updating, but the template is not. when something like that happened, what's probably wrong in our application? Change detection. And this is what's exactly happening here. As we mentioned before, modules are declaring for us the zones, and they actually giving us the ability to do this automatic change detection. And if we're not declaring this component in a zone, we have to do it ourselves. What's shiny about Ivy, it's giving us the ability to do it without any dependency injection. We don't have dependency injection. We can just run a function called theta, detect changes. Instead of the console log here, we will do it for the plus and the reset functions. And here, now everything works as expected, right? Wow. So this is the first thing, but let's do something even more interesting. I have here a service called a service called storage service. That's the reason it happened that the storage service. Now it's going to stick with me. I have a storage service which actually using the HTTP client and just posting some fake URL. I'm not really going to post it to somewhere. I'm just want to demonstrate the injection problem we have. And let's implement the save button in our counter component. So I'm adding a constructor and adding our storage service of type storage. I'm typing and all the buttons are shaking. And now let's add a save method, okay, which actually already we binded to the click event on the save button in our template. What I'm going to do is just this storage service dot save counter with our counter, and I also want to subscribe to it. Now what's going to happen? Another error. What's the problem? Inject must be called from an injection context, and as we already know, we don't have an injector because who's in charge of the injectors is the modules. And who else has an injector? The application who renders the counter component. So we can go back to this one, and here we have two options. The first one, we can have the constructor and just inject the injector. I always it really makes me laugh about this sentence. So let's create the injector, and we can inject the injector and pass render component the injector, this injector. And this will works. If we add here some save and we invoke the HTTP, we can see the HTTP error of the fake URL. And there is maybe a better way to inject the injector. Now, Ivy is providing us with a function called const injector called theta directive inject. Theta directive inject. Let's see that I have it. Yeah. And what is getting this function actually need the injection token of what we're trying to inject. So we pass the injection token, and this should be enough. What's happened?
You have to remove the const or move it into.
Oh yeah. Let's move it inside. Yeah. And now we have the injector. And without dependency injection, we got an injector who helped us to inject this service who has the HTTP client. All right? So this is the first example of how I see those standalone components in the future. Let's go back in. Wait. All good? Well, the second example, automatic change detection. And if you ask me, one of the beauteous things in Angular is that until now, we shouldn't be worried for change detection. Most of the time, we just do something and we saw the result in our template. And automatic change detection is really important part of our day-to-day. And I guess most of you using the async pipe, yeah, right? Everybody using the async pipe, yeah? What's the problem with the async pipe? Let's have a look on the example. So I have another example, a simple component who's just using the HTTP client to get some posts array from the net. I'm just using a JSON placeholder to get those posts, okay? And then in the template, I'm using this async pipe to show them, right? Should work. I don't know how many of you checked the async pipe implementation, but it's relying on zones. It's using the mark for check function of the change detector. If you don't going to have zones, if you want to see it, wait a second. Let's see it. This is the example. If you just want to demonstrate how life without zones can be, we can go to our code, to our main TS file, and when we bootstrapping the application, we can just shut down zones. How are we doing it? ng-zone, nope. And I'm not seeing anything on the screen. So I'm first of all going to clean that up, because otherwise the rest of the talk not going to work. And if we're speaking about where it's going from here, is actually we're going to have something called the push pipe, which I'm so glad that Manfred and Michael are both here, because they both suggested implementation to the core team that I'm quite sure that one of them, at least one of them, or they both, or a combination of those both, are going to be this push pipe, this future push pipe. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, I have nothing. By the way, I think I have Manfred implementation on my GitHub, on this talk GitHub repo, so you can have a look on that. Thank you, Manfred.
I've also stolen it from someone.
Everybody's stealing from someone.
I've borrowed it.
Yeah. So, demo number 3. If we already mentioned the mark for check function, you're probably using the mark for check function when you're having on push components, right? And this is also another important optimization we're doing when we're implementing Angular application. We want to keep our components in on push strategy. So let's have a look on this example. We have two components. The first one, mark for check component, was just declaring a behavior subject of 3 numbers, 1, 2, 3, okay? I also have an add function who's just next this, the next number that declared in the template. Now, I have a child component, which the child component has the data. It's getting it as an input, all right? And I'm subscribing to the data every time I have change. You didn't like the on push, huh? So every time I'm subscribing to the data, I will get the new number on the list. Now, that's it. So this is the numbers 1, 2, 3, and when I'm clicking next, I'm getting the 4th number. Now, if I'm going to the code of the child component, and I'm just going to change the change detection to change detection strategy on push, it will work or not? It's not working. How we can fix it? Ideas? We actually can use the CDR to the change detector ref that every time that the subscription is popped up, we can mark for check. So in the next cycle, Angular will detect changes and run change detection on this component. But we are in Ivy days. We don't want to use the change detection. What Angular actually gave us is another function called markDirty, which now help us to make it work. Cool? Okay. Let's see. Next one. Oh.
What's the difference now?
What?
Before.
What's the difference?
What's the difference? Before I had to call a function and now I call another function.
No, you didn't call, you call the function. Yeah, you have to call this function when you on push strategy, because otherwise U3 not going to know that this component have to be rechecked.
Yeah.
The thing is, now you don't need the DI to inject the change detector F.
Okay.
You're just using a function from Angular core called markDirty.
So it's like a global function you can use every time.
Yeah, instead of inject the change detector F and call the mark for check, now you can call the markDirty. Well, demo number 4, another great way of thinking about those standalone components, which I'm always talking about, is the ability to load them dynamically only on demand. And let's take this use case of, I'm seeing it now a lot in websites. You have a chat box, which it's part of all, like a small intercom, it's called, in your main bundle. It's probably going to end up in your main bundle because it's part of your layout, right? It has to be in all the pages. How many of you actually uses those chats box? Those services box? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah? I've checked, and less than 2% of the users actually using those things. This thing is ending up in your main bundle. But let's imagine that we have the ability now to load this chat box only on demand. And let's see it in action. Before that, Angular 8 gave us the new ability to use ES6 import functions to load modules in a dynamic way. You familiar with that? Yeah? Okay. So now, if we go here to our code, let's go to the feature component. Yeah. And here, let's add a button, load counter, for example, that on click will load the counter. Now, let's implement the load counter. What I want to do is call the import function, navigate to a component, directly to a component, to my counter component. Okay. Here we're getting a promise that we know that inside of it we will get some component, right? What we want to do with this component? Call render component function, right? So I'm using the theta render component function with the C counter component. Let's already declare those host and injector that we already know that we have to do. So I'm adding my host, and injector will be this injector. Okay, and then let's add my host. That's it. Now, before we trying it and seeing the result, I want to clean up all the other calls that I have to this counter component. So I will go to app module and clean this one, and also go to render component, our first example, and clear this call. Okay, I don't know those. Now, if we checked the network on our JS files, when I'm clicking the load counter, it's coming right now. I'm paying for the counter component only on demand. And this is a huge thing. I can lazy load components, not only modules. Yeah, cool. Well, last part for today, maybe the thing that I think is the most exciting. Michael is always laughing on me because of this, but after this session, you will laugh on him. If you ask me, this is maybe the most exciting thing now we can do with Angular components, HOC. And what is HOC? Higher order component. In other words, a function who's getting a component and returning the same component, but also affecting, because this is a function, we can affect a component in between. And let's see example of experimental HOC that I'm going to implement right now on stage. I'm actually going to implement the unsubscriber HOC. Okay, how many of you dealing with memory leaks because of RxJS unsubscriptions? Missing unsubscriptions? 2 or 3 hands in the crowd. So I'm going to show you, I will explain the problem first, okay? So we have 2 components. The first one is the timer component. We have a counter subscription, which this is just a timer who's ticking each and every second. Every second I'm ticking the next value, okay, which is the counter value, okay. Now I also have a destroy on destroy implementation who's telling me that the counter stopped and when it stopped. Besides that, I'm also adding a tap operator which console logging the counter subscriptions value. This is going to tell us that the subscription is still alive even though the component is gone. Okay? Now, we have another component who use this timer that we just saw. We have 2 buttons. The first one is destroy, who's just killing the timer component, and revive to create a new instance of it. Okay? Easy. Let's see it in action. Now, this is my HOC, this is my timer component, and it ticks on screen and in the console. Now, if I'm going to destroy it, what's going to happen? I destroyed the component stopped, but the subscription is still alive, right? Because we didn't unsubscribe. Let's revive the component again. Now we have 2 subscriptions. Makes sense. Let's kill it again and revive it again. And this is how you make memory leak. The one who raised his hand. Cheer him up. Now, I'm going to implement together with you an experimental HOC, which is going to make this unsubscription automatically. Let's do it together. So I'm going to export a function called unsubscriber, which return a function who's getting the component type. And here I'm going to first declare the original factory from the component type ngComponent def factory. Now, because of Ivy, we have the factory on the component def. Cool. Next thing we want to do, we want to override the factory to get a function who's getting the args. And what we want to do, create, let's create the component instance. So const cmp is going to be the original factory invoking with the args. Great. Let's return the component here. Let's return the component, and here the component type. And this is our basic HOC. Nothing really special in it. Let's add a console log here, just to show the component type. And on our timer component, I can add a decorator to use this unsubscriber. Let's see what we got. I have to rebuild it, I guess. Michael, you're with us? Ah, yeah. No, we're just rebuilding.
Should I sing a song in between?
No, that's right. So here we have the timer component instance. We actually can see the counter value, and we can see also the counter subscription that we have on the component. Cool, huh? Now, let's leverage the power of Angular HOCs with what I'm trying to create. Let's see it. Instead of just console log this component instance, let's now override the implementation of onDestroy. How I'm going to do it. So I'm going to take the component type, the ngComponentDef, and on it, there is an onDestroy hook. Right? This is how Angular works. Instead of it, I'm going to create a function which first going to check if the component type has a property named ngOnDestroy. If though we don't want to override the user implementation of onDestroy, we just invoke it, right? Where's the typo? Line 7. Oh, thank you. Great. Now, we invoke the user ngOnDestroy. Now, we want to take each and every object keys of the component instance, and for each we want to iterate over them and check if is subscription. I already made a function prepared which checking if the value that I'm getting, if the type of it is subscription. It's really easy one. So I'm going just to use it right now. So I'm checking if this subscription, the component in the prop, and if yes, oh, let's import this one. Utils, great. If it is a subscription, what we want to do? Unsubscribe. CMP prop unsubscribe. All good? Looks good. I can't see anything. I hope you can see. Now, let's see this. The timer is ticking, the console is ticking, I'm destroying it, and you like it? Yeah. So, yeah. That's it. Let's summarize what we just learned. Okay, so the Ivy, the third generation of Angular compiler, is around the corner. Seriously, it's going to come up in the next version as a stable one. As I see the future of Angular, we're going to have a lot of amazing features like those standalone components, smarter chain detection, easier dynamic loading of modules and components, and if you ask me, the most exciting one is the HOC. I haven't spoke about it here, but think about the concept that those standalone components going to serve a lot the ideas behind Angular elements, so also keep that in mind. I know it's still not ready, but I really think that you should give it a try right now and don't wait until it's going to be released officially. If you looking for more materials about Angular Ivy, I wrote also 2 famous blog posts about it. First of all, the first one is all you need to know about Angular Ivy, and the second one, the future of Angular components. And that's it. Thank you for having me.